Tough trade talks with Beijing and Washington. The Prime Minister is in China to deepen investment ties as the government urgently investigates a new Trump tariff, this time on pharmaceuticals. I'm Patricia Karvelas, standing in for David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. Anthony Albanese's trip is the second time he's visited China as Prime Minister. This will be his fourth meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. It's a balancing act between the soft diplomacy of pandas versus the backdrop of geopolitical tensions with Beijing, and comes in stark contrast to his government's inability to secure a face-to-face conversation with Donald Trump. Australia is scrambling to make sense of a new tariff on pharmaceuticals floated by the President, but the government says it won't be trading away the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. Back home, the government has put the scourge of anti-Semitism at the top of its agenda. The Special Envoy, Gillian Segal, has recommended stripping funding where possible from broadcasters, universities and arts institutions who fail in the fight. It's ignited a fierce debate about how to tackle anti-Jewish hate and maintain freedom of speech.
It's a move sending shockwaves through the global pharmaceutical industry.
There are concerns Australians could lose access to new medicines.
The US president delivering some bad medicine.
They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%.
The PBS is not on the table in any negotiation.
Any tariffs against the sector should be opposed.
This is his agenda. He knows how he wants to play it.
The only pharmaceutical Donald Trump should look to take is a chill pill.
It's very difficult for the Australian government to negotiate anything if the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese can't be in the room.
It's not clear that a face-to-face meeting would make much difference.
I've made it very clear that the issues such as the pharmaceutical benefits scheme are not on the table.
Prime Minister Albanese is one of the only world leaders not to have a face-to-face meeting with him.
What we need from them is less hyperventilation and more concentration.
And that is alarming.
A bold new plan to crack down on the scourge of anti-Semitism.
Special Envoy Gillian Segal handing over her report into hatred directed at Jewish Australians.
Whatever your issue in the Middle East, it is not advanced by attacking people here in Australia.
This is Gillian Segal's call to action.
The plan is an overarching one and it addresses anti-Semitism in many places, in our laws, classrooms, universities, media.
The response from Jewish groups to the action plan is mixed.
The Australian Lawyers Alliance has raised freedom of speech concerns.
If it needs tweaking, then let's tweak it. We will step up and demand a stronger accountability from the Prime Minister.
Most Australians want people to just get on. Good morning.
The Prime Minister is bound for China.
Trade's really going to be top of the agenda.
The Prime Minister will raise a whole lot of deep and serious problems, whether that's the aggression we've seen from China with its circumnavigation of Australia, Dr Young Hun Chun.
We cooperate where we can, we disagree where we must.
It's an important visit and it should underline the respect for relationship.
You said that we're seeing the worrying pace of China's nuclear and conventional military build-up.
I talked about the importance of a region where no country dominates and no country is dominated.
We were pro-panda.
We want to contribute to both deterrence and reassurance in order to prevent conflict.
Excited to be here, Prime Minister?
I am. It's a very warm welcome. Thank you.
My guest this morning is the Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy. First, let's check what's making news. The Nine papers are reporting Australia has complained to China about a live fire exercise in February that disrupted flights between Sydney and New Zealand, delivering a strong message on the eve of Anthony Albanese's trade and tourism-focused visit. Foreign Minister Penny Wong raised concerns about the heavily armed flotilla's circumnavigation of Australia in a meeting with her Chinese counterpart on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Malaysia on Friday. And an exclusive by my colleagues Tom Lowry and Stephen Jedgetts, a near-identical helicopter to the troubled Taipan, which was retired after a deadly crash 2 years ago, will take part in the Talisman Sabre defence exercises. 3 New Zealand NH-90 helicopters are likely to carry Australian personnel during the joint exercises, and they begin today. Meanwhile, the BBC reports President Donald Trump has announced that the European Union and Mexico will face a 30% tariff on imports to the US from the 1st of August. In a letter, he warned he would impose even higher import taxes if they retaliate. Well, the Prime Minister's visit to China comes at a critical moment. While relations between Beijing and Canberra have stabilised, there are still some deep and intractable disputes, differences even panda diplomacy can't resolve. This week, Anthony Albanese will perform a delicate diplomatic dance, balancing the benefits of trade and tourism between the two nations and the thorny issues of Beijing's aggression in the South China Sea and, of course, human rights abuses. Meanwhile, China's charm offensive comes as the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, warns of the worrying pace of the country's nuclear and military build-up. The ABC's Global Affairs Editor, Laura Tingle, joins me now from Shanghai, and it's very exciting to be joined by you in your new role, Laura. The Prime Minister has been emphasising trade and tourism and really building on that economic relationship. But it comes with the backdrop, of course, of a lot of tensions geopolitically. Just walk me through this dance.
Yes, it is a very delicate dance indeed, PK. While this meeting is going on, which has got a lot of sort of panda-hugging feel from the 80s and 90s to it, we've got the Taiwanese having their biggest ever military exercises, Talisman Sabre, the US-Australian operation exercises going on in Australia. And in the last 24 hours, the Financial Times has been reporting that Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defence in the US, has demanded of Japan and Australia that we say what we would do in the case of war with Taiwan. Now, the Australian government isn't going to look like it's going to respond to that. It's saying, well, you know, we conduct our conversations more discreetly, but it just shows you that we can't escape all of these things. But there has been this material change, I think, in the way that the relationship is conducted. First, you know, after 10 years of focus on national security, we're back talking about trade. And I think the whole sort of spectre of Donald Trump and all these tariffs issues means that China is really interested in showing itself to be very reasonable and sane on trade, and that seems to be their approach in its relationships with Australia.
You mentioned the Defence Undersecretary and the pressure he's been placing, well, you know, with officials to Australia. This is, though, a difficult answer for Australia. Australia's being very careful, but the pressure is intensifying, isn't it, Laura?
Well, the pressure is intensifying, and you know, the really big question is intensifying, PK. Would we go to war with the Americans over Taiwan? Now, there's a question about whether the Americans would go to war over Taiwan. Let's be perfectly clear about that. But you know, this is a really central tenet of the whole forward defence strategy that puts us in line to have the US submarines in the short term. So it's sort of getting to the pointy end of this debate about exactly what it is we do with our American alliance partners, but also, you know, are we prepared to go to war over Taiwan? So that's a pretty sort of tough question to be being sort of floated while the Australian Prime Minister is in China.
Certainly is. Laura Tingle, look forward to your analysis throughout this 6-day trip. Thank you very much. Time to find out what our panellists make of it all. And joining us, Jacob Greber, Jennifer Hewett and Mark Kenny. Delightful to have you all on the couch with me in David's absence. Let's start on that China trip, Jacob. It's a key trip. It's a week-long, or close to week-long trip for the Prime Minister. What does success look like for the Prime Minister, given all the tensions geopolitically?
I
I think what we're seeing here is the Prime Minister being determined to go his own way on balancing these two relationships. It's far too soon to call it an Albanese doctrine of foreign policy, but there's a clear pattern forming here, which is he will stand up against some of these, not explicitly, but by the mere act, for instance, of going to China for 6 days. It's a long trip. Standing up to some of these sort of calls for us to drop everything, race to Washington, and somehow beg for, approval or settle down the guy in the White House. The Prime Minister's made the effort. The meeting didn't happen. Now he's going to the other big priority, which is in China. So I think it's part of him defining himself the way he's operating and not taking a backward step. Difficult conversations, as Laura well pointed out, will be had.
Oh, they certainly will. Here's the Prime Minister after landing in China describing what he wants to achieve.
There are important meetings to be had this week, and the fact that I am leading a very large business delegation speaks to the importance of the economic relationship between Australia and China. We know that 1 in 4 of Australia's jobs depends on our exports, and China is our major trading partner, with exports to China being worth more in value than the next 4 countries combined.
Not mincing words there about the importance. We're in a period, Jennifer, of stabilisation of that relationship. Is this trying to go beyond that?
Well, I think both countries are wanting to go beyond it in the sense that obviously Australia always wants to improve trade with China. You know, the Prime Minister, I think, said rather misleadingly, "Oh, it's all about Australian jobs. It's that simple." Well, of course, nothing's that simple.
Nothing is literally that simple.
Yeah, but from China's point of view, of course, the other issue, yes, it may want more foreign investment in Australia, which is kind of seems to be unlikely to happen in many sensitive areas. So they'll kind of dance around that a bit. But the other thing that China, of course, wants out of this is to contrast its approach with that of China. With that of the US. And so, therefore, Albanese has got to be a little careful about not being set up as a prop for China's, duchessing of a country like Australia to demonstrate that they're so much more a reliable partner.
It's an interesting point you make. Now, on the cusp of this, last week, the Foreign Minister Penny Wong gave a very significant speech, which I think addressed a bit of that concern. Here she is.
China continues to assert its strategic influence and project its military power further into our region. And we have seen the worrying pace of China's nuclear and conventional military build-up without the transparency that the region expects. We are realistic about China's objectives in changing the regional balance of power. So, Mark Kenny, that's a speech delivered on the cusp of the trip from the Prime Minister. Does that answer criticism that the government perhaps is trying to sideline these geopolitical, the South China Sea tensions, the militarisation?
I don't think it answers it in the sense that the critics of the government's approach here are always going to be critics. There's a sort of lot of tribalism in the commentary and particularly in the sort of formal politics of all of this. But I do think that it speaks to a reality, and it's a reality in relation to the bilateral relationship with the US as well, and that is that there are good things and bad things about the relationship. Now, this is a very strong economic relationship, as the PM's been at pains to point out. But there are these strategic tensions, these strategic differences. There are issues of friction within the relationship. And so it's really about how strong that relationship is. It's certainly on a more even keel than it was when the government came to power. So that's going to be the balancing act, I think.
And that's the tricky part, of course, of this 6-day trip, Jacob. It's one thing for Penny Wong to raise some of these issues. A report out today that she did raise the circumnavigation with her counterparts, so the Foreign Minister raising difficult issues. But now the onus will be on the Prime Minister to have those hard conversations too.
And zoom out a little bit, look at it globally. China, under Xi Jinping, is in an awkward position. It's behind Russia, maybe not explicitly, but definitely in the background. An extraordinary report this week that the European Foreign Representative Kallas has revealed that the Chinese sort of indicated that they need the war in Ukraine to continue, in essence, I'm paraphrasing here, because it's distracting the Trump administration from focusing on China. You have the problem in Iran that China also backed. So China's at risk of being in the wrong part on some of these geopolitical issues, placement-wise. So having an Australian Prime Minister show up, demonstrating that you are now a sort of paragon of world trade and a rules-based order, that's what they'll try and do, puts the Prime Minister in a very, very delicate spot.
And we've got this report today about the Undersecretary that was referred to by Laura Tingle, Elbridge Colby, putting pressure on Australian officials about what are you going to do in an instance between China and Taiwan, when we actually don't, she was right to point out, we don't actually know how the US would deal with that either. So it's a bit rich expecting an answer from us, but it goes to that tension.
Well, it does go to the tension, and it also goes, I think, to the fact that Australian rhetoric's all very well, and this idea, oh, we're going to forge our own way, and in some ways I think Wong's speech was a bit of a follow-on from the Prime Minister's speech, where he talked, and the Curtin Foundation, where he talked explicitly about Australia being independent, but didn't actually mention that one of the things John Curtin did was turn to the US. And it's all very well to say we're going to be independent, and yet at the same time be refusing to up any of our defence spending. And so I think the kind of contradictions between our rhetoric and what we actually do is delicate, and I think and increasingly obvious, and I think that's going to be a very difficult line for the Prime Minister to talk about in Beijing as well, because clearly the Chinese have already tried to say, oh, well, you know, you mustn't go ahead with that, because that would be a very, very bad idea, despite the fact, obviously, the Chinese are greatly upping their military spending.
This has been, you're right, but this has been, this gap between rhetoric and actions, or between what you actually do in the end and what you talk about doing, has really framed this whole issue of Taiwan anyway. I mean, the official US policy has been strategic ambiguity, that is, an uncertainty about what the US would do. I mean, the equation that we are left with, rising from Elbridge Colby's position on this, is that would we go to war? That's the question. Would the US go to war? And if the US went to war, would we do it too? I mean, there's so many layers of hypothetical on that. It's quite ridiculous to be.
But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm actually. I don't think it's particularly clear what Elbridge Colby is saying to us privately at those levels. We're getting sort of reports, we're getting hints, we're getting suggestions about what the discussion's about. Another version of it that I've heard is that what he's concerned about, and you can see it in the book that he wrote a couple of years ago about America's allies, is can the allies stand on their own 2 feet in a hot war, in a contest? Can they protect the base, for instance, in the north, without having Americans come in and do that work? So the suggestion there is that Australia needs to spend more on missiles to protect its assets, so that America doesn't have to look over its shoulder. I don't know that that's quite the same as a sort of pre-commitment on a hypothetical war in Taiwan.
No, and of course
in Taiwan.
And the other issue, of course, is US submarines and what happens to those. I mean, obviously the US is concerned that they don't want to deplete their own ability to have their submarines, and that is this kind of very murky area in AUKUS, which has not been clear at all, and I think that's still going to happen.
And is getting less clear.
It's getting less clear, but we'll try and clarify it in a moment, maybe. Time now to talk to the Defence Industry Minister, Pat Conroy, to take us there. Brett Worthington spoke to Australia's former ambassador to China, Geoff Raby, for this week's Insiders on Background podcast about the tightrope the Prime Minister must walk between our largest trade and strategic partners.
We have a China on a charm offensive. Donald Trump's created a great space for China to move into on the charm offensive. But I think we need to lift our sights. And this is with this visit is the moment in which we can lift our sights and start to realise greater opportunities from this relationship and not be held back by those dreadful years of the trade disputes.
Pat Conroy, welcome to Insiders.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
Is building a stronger trading and economic relationship with China a way of Australia maybe insulating or protecting itself given the changing economic position and tariffs from the United States?
No, this is about Australia having good international relationships with everyone in the world. The Australian people expect us to invest strongly in our diplomatic capability as well as our military capability. China's our largest trading partner. 25% of our exports go to China. We've worked hard to stabilise the relationship, and unblock $20 billion worth of trade. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs that we've helped protect. So Prime Minister Albanese's trip is all about promoting jobs, promoting trade, but also managing differences. Dialogue is about managing differences, not eliminating them. And that's obviously one of the key goals of Prime Minister Albanese.
But you said 25% is the rate. Would you like that to be higher?
Well, we'd love to sell more to everywhere in the world.
No, but specifically on China, because that's what this week's trip is about, would you like to increase that 25% to a higher rate?
Well, we'd like to increase the pie as a whole, and Prime Minister Albanese announced a tourism initiative on his first day in China. We'd like to see more Chinese tourists coming to Australia, spending their money and driving more Australian jobs. So the economic relationship is important, but the discussions will be much broader than that. They'll cover human rights issues, they'll cover our view about security in the region. This is a complex relationship, but it's one we'll handle in a mature, adult way, as we have over the last 3 years.
Elbridge Colby, who's the Defence Under-Secretary for the United States, has been pressing Australia and Japan about what position we would take if there was an escalation and a war between China and Taiwan. What is our answer when we're pressed?
Well, our answer is the same one that DPM Miles gave in Parliament in an important statement a couple of years back. The sole power to commit Australia to war or to allow our territory to be used for a conflict is the elected government of the day. That is our position. Sovereignty will always be prioritised, and that will continue to be our position.
But that's not the question that's being asked. It's not about sovereignty. It's how we would react if that scenario was established. Are we giving a clear answer behind closed doors to these repeated questions?
Well, first, I don't disclose confidential discussions, but I make a couple of broad points. One, we don't engage in hypotheticals. We don't discuss hypotheticals. But secondly, the decision to commit Australian troops to a conflict will be made by the government of the day. Not in advance, but by the government of the day, and that's our position, and it's been long established.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong gave a pretty significant speech, as you know, last week. She talked about, and I'm quoting from her speech, the worrying pace of China's nuclear and conventional military build-up, and it's not happening with the transparency the region expects. Do you share those concerns that China is not being transparent about its build-up in the region?
Absolutely, and that's a position that we've long articulated. It was in the National Defence Strategy that we released last year. China is engaging in a very significant build-up of its military forces, both conventional and nuclear, and they need to be more transparent about that. We've said that publicly, we've said that privately, and we'll continue to do so.
So will the Prime Minister say it in his meeting with Xi Jinping?
Well, again, I'm not going to foreshadow everything that the Prime Minister will or won't say, but the conversation with his counterparts will cover economic, security and human rights issues. We've been very clear about that, but we are being very clear that we want a balanced region where no one is dominated and no one dominates.
Okay.
We're seeing in my portfolio of the Pacific, China seeking to secure a military base in the region, and we're working very hard to be the primary security partner of choice for the region because we don't think that's a particularly optimal thing for Australia.
Penny Wong did raise with her counterpart the circumnavigation of Australia by the Chinese flotilla. Just a really direct question, will that be raised by the Prime Minister in his talks with the President and Prime Minister?
Again, the Prime Minister's conversation with his counterparts will cover security, human rights and our economic relationship.
So you expect something like that, the circumnavigation, to be raised at that high level?
I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what the PM will or won't say, but
is that the right place to raise such a thing?
Well, we've been very clear, both publicly and privately, that we thought that China should have provided more notice about its live firing exercise. It was not what we do. We normally give 12 to 24 hours notice before a live firing exercise. They gave notice, but we regarded it as insufficient. We'll continue to articulate and raise that both publicly and privately.
OK, so this would be the right time to raise it then?
Again, we'll continue to raise it, but I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what the PM will cover in his conversations. OK.
Defence has confirmed that it expects Chinese surveillance vessels to monitor the biannual Talisman Sabre War Games. Is that happening?
Well, Talisman Sabre launches today. It's our most important bilateral exercise with the United States. 30,000 personnel from 19 countries will participate. It's not unusual for other countries to observe that. China has observed those exercises for the last 4 exercises since 2017. It won't be unexpected if they continue to do that.
Okay. Do we know if they're currently surveilling those exercises?
It won't be unexpected, but I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of whether they are there.
I don't know if that's particularly nitty-gritty. I mean, don't we have a right to know if the Chinese are surveilling this particular exercise?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to say that my most up-to-date information is that they are not observing the exercise, but the exercise hasn't started yet. It starts today. I'm being very frank with you that it would be unusual for them not to observe it, and we'll adjust accordingly.
Okay, what does adjusting accordingly mean?
Well, it means that we will obviously observe their activities and monitor their presence around Australia, but we'll also adjust how we conduct those exercises. People observe these exercises to collect intelligence around procedures, around the electronic spectrum and the use of communications, and we'll adjust accordingly so that we manage that leakage. So
you're saying if they surveil us, which we expect based on past precedent, that we will use it as an opportunity to surveil them. It sounds very spy movie now, but in order to collect our own intelligence.
Well, I think it'll be a two-way process, but when we conduct these exercises, we're always cognizant that they're being observed by people who want to collect information about how we work with our allies, how we communicate with our allies and partners, and you manage that accordingly in a sensitive way. That's what the Australian people would expect our Australian Defence Force to do, and we'll continue to do that. But again, I'll say that the Chinese military have observed these exercises since 2017, and it'd be very unusual if they didn't do that this time.
Yeah, okay. I just want to talk about AUKUS and the investment into AUKUS. The US will be looking at what we've done to demonstrate our own readiness. Is it correct that no work has begun at the Henderson shipyards yet?
No, that's not correct. Are you referring to HMS Sterling or the Henderson Maritime Complex?
The Henderson Maritime Complex.
Well, the Henderson Maritime Complex is not required for Submarine Rotation Force West. What is required for Submarine Rotation Force West, which begins in 2027, is upgrades to HMS Sterling, where our submarines are based and where US submarines will visit. We've invested billions of dollars in upgrading HMS Sterling, and that work is underway. The Henderson Maritime Precinct is about where we would maintain our submarines when we receive them well into the 2030s. So they're two separate timings. The one we're focused on now is HMS Sterling.
Okay, former US Navy Secretary Richard Spencer has warned that Australia needs to move quickly on both of those sites to ensure they're ready to go by 2027. Is there any case, given we are now going to be reviewed, and that's imminent, by the US, to accelerate both of these sites to perhaps be ready to offer something if we want to hold on to AUKUS?
Well, work is going well at HMS Sterling. In fact, we had a US submarine dock there last week and received some maintenance. We've had very successful maintenance activities of US submarines, and importantly, that facility at HMS Sterling will contribute 1,800 maintenance days over the 5 years of Surf West, which is 1,800 maintenance days that the US won't be needed to give in their own maintenance bases. Henderson is going through a consolidation process, but again, that is not required until the 2030s, and in fact, late into the 2030s when we need to maintain our Virginia-class submarines. HMS Sterling is the immediate activity, and that's where we're investing billions of dollars right now.
Okay. The Pentagon, as you know, there was a report this week, is considering adding extra costs and conditions on the AUKUS deal. Will we be prepared to pay more?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals about a review that hasn't been delivered.
Is this so important to us that there's no plan B? The Defence Minister made that clear. If there's no plan B, will we be prepared to spend more?
Well, let's see what the review finds. I'm confident it will support AUKUS, just as our review of AUKUS found that, just as the UK review of AUKUS found that. It's in the national interest of all three countries. It will contribute to deterrence as well as grow 20,000 jobs in Australia. Let's see what the US review comes forward with, and then we'll react accordingly. But we are investing in the US industrial base to release submarines, just as we're investing $30 billion in our own base to build nuclear-powered but conventionally armed submarines and grow 20,000 jobs.
Okay, so open question. Have you been briefed yet if the report is ready to go? Because I think that time frame has lapsed.
Well, again, there's been lots of speculation about what the time frame is for the review. That's a question for the US government. My last information is that the review has not been completed yet. We're engaging at senior levels as you'd expect us to do so, and we'll continue to do that.
Of course, spending on defence has been a big question mark, and whether we're prepared to spend more. I've got a broader question. Do you think it's worth counting soft diplomacy, the money you're expending in, for instance, the Pacific, in the broader suite of kind of the broader spending we're doing on defence and related soft diplomacy projects? Is that the way we're framing it when we talk to the United States?
We're making the point to everyone that both are incredibly important. PM Albanese in his Curtin oration, for example, made the point that we're investing in our relationships in the region as well as our military capability. And we are increasing our defence budget very significantly, the largest peacetime increase in the defence budget ever, $57 billion over the next 10 years above the current trajectory, the previous trajectory, including $10 billion over the next 4 years. That's a massive investment that is delivering additional capability right now, and we've been very open with the Australian people that we'll approach it in that way.
And do you expect that we will have to spend more?
Well, from the PM down, we made it clear that the way we'll do that is if a case is made for more capability, we will invest more. We're increasing it by $57 billion, the defence budget. But what we're not going to do is pluck a figure out of the air and then work out how to spend it, which is what the coalition took to the last election. And the Australian people were very clear that they preferred our approach, which is make a case for additional capability, then invest it. That's a sensible way. And that's how we're doing the $57 billion of increased defence spending.
You're the Defence Industry Minister. That's all about the money we spend on the enormous things that we spend money on in defence. Procurement has been a perennial problem in defence. Value for money, overruns, delays. Is part of your concern that in essence we do this quite badly and you are reluctant to spend more?
Well, it's a challenging area for every country around the world. These are the most complex, sophisticated projects any government attempts. And it was pretty problematic under the last government. We've made reforms already. We've made significant reforms to how we do defence procurement, and that's improved the process. But we flagged that we want to do more in this area. We will be reforming defence to a greater extent because it's important that taxpayers have confidence that every single dollar goes to improving the capability of the Australian Defence Force, as well as supporting the 100,000 Australians who work in that industry every day.
Now, the Treasurer told us last week there was an urgency in getting some clarity on this 200% tariff on our pharmaceuticals. Do you have the clarity yet?
Again, we're still engaging with the US administration. There's questions about timelines for that. So we'll keep engaging and we'll keep arguing for no tariff for our pharmaceuticals and arguing very strongly in our national interest.
Has there been any clarity from them since there was an urgency put on finding out about this?
Well, we've been very clear that we won't be sacrificing or making changes to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme or any other policies. We'll always act in our national interest and we'll always argue that these tariffs are not a friendly act and are an act of economic self-harm to the United States.
Is it also not a friendly act to not get an answer when you ask it? Because it seems there is a delay in even getting clarity about some of these tariffs.
Well, again, we'll keep pushing for that information.
Must be frustrating, though.
Well, again, I'll leave that to someone else to answer, but we'll keep articulating in our national interest and saying that this does harm to the US consumers and business community, and it's inconsistent with our free trade agreement.
Just want to end on the big anti-Semitism report, which of course landed in the government's hands to act on. The big debate that seems to have emerged from it is the definition itself. Do you consider a view which is that Israel shouldn't exist, it should be one state, for instance, with equal rights? That's a lot of the protest movements call, for instance. Is that anti-Semitic, that view?
Well, like all Australians, I've been appalled about the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7, and that's why we've taken a huge range of actions that you know about. Regarding the Siegel report, we've welcomed it and we'll consider it and come back with our response.
But is that on the question specifically that I put to you, do you consider the view that Israel shouldn't exist to be anti-Semitic?
Well, we support the International Holocaust Memorial's definition of anti-Semitism. Our position on Israel is that there should be a two-state solution with both states.
That's your view, but protesters might say something different. Do you think it's their right and that that's not anti-Semitic?
Well, we've made the point that you can have views about the Middle East without resorting to racist language, and our position is a two-state solution with two states with secure borders, with civilian lives being respected.
But is it racist for someone to call for a one-state?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not a lawyer, but I will say that our position is that there should be two states. We support the International Holocaust Memorial's definition of anti-Semitism, and people can have a view about the Middle East conflict without resorting to racist language.
Pat Conroy, it's been a pleasure to have you on Insiders with me this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Let's get back to our panel now. Jacob Greber, Jennifer Hewett and Mark Kenny. Really interesting interview there. The spying on the spying.
Sounded like an ABBA song, didn't it? Watching me, watching you.
I did, but it is exactly that. But what I found really interesting, and maybe I've been nerding out on defence news in the last couple of days preparing for the show, but was, you know, him talking about responding to then collect information about how that real life scenario would look.
I think that's what we do. I mean, I'd expect our defence forces to do that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Well, at least we know about it this time, which is more than we could say about the last.
We'd have to wait on a New Zealand pilot to tell us whatever it was that happened last time.
Well, you know, hats off to New Zealand pilots. Look, we talked in that interview too about the new tariffs. There's a whole lot of new tariffs. It's so busy in the tariff world, you can hardly keep up. But the one that really pertains to us in a pretty disturbing way is a 200% tariff from Donald Trump. Here he is actually just randomly throwing it out there the way he does. Here he is.
If they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country, they're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%. We'll give them a certain period of time to get their act together.
Okay, certain amount of time, but we can't get any clarity on it.
Well, I don't think of course you're not going to get any clarity. He's talking about a year, 18 months, you know, maybe 200%. Really, I think it's a bit... I mean, of course, you've got to be very alert to whatever Donald Trump says. I mean, we all have these, you know, a shock a day, particularly on tariffs. But, you know, it's a very long time, even till August the 1st, let alone, you know, in a year and 18 months. And the other issue, of course, is for Australia, actually what we mostly export is kind of blood products. He's actually more concerned, and the American pharmaceutical industry is far more concerned about the, you know, the drugs, and they're not being paid enough for drugs in Australia. And that's going to be actually, I think, a trickier issue for the government to negotiate because of the PBS and how that operates, and maybe that needs a bit of tweaking in terms of speeding up approvals and things like that. But it's just that the 200% thing has got all the headlines, but actually I wouldn't be too fussed about that at the moment.
An interesting point. The Treasurer, though, his language around this, it was quite strong in saying that we would oppose it. Here he is talking about
the PBS is not on the table in any negotiation. This Albanese Labor government is about strengthening the PBS in the interests of our people, not weakening it in the interests of American multinationals. We've made that clear on a number of occasions.
So, Mark, I actually interviewed the Treasurer this week too, and I pressed him on timeframes, prices, all of these issues, and he was pretty hard line, no negotiation. I mean, the politics here is clear, isn't it?
It is, and the PBS is one of the great public policy achievements of Australia. It's a really fantastic program. It provides affordable medicines to Australians, and that's absolutely critical. The alternative is the American system, where people get sick and they literally go broke, particularly if they don't have private healthcare, if they don't have employer-related health insurance, you know. So, I mean, that is just a debacle, the US system, as it is in so many other ways, and we'd be absolutely crazy to be mimicking.
But also, you don't, I mean, the government is obviously never going to say, oh, look, we're just bowing down to this, and they're going to kind of continue to protect the PBS, they're going to continue to subsidise it. There may be more subsidies required. I mean, in the end, that's what it's going to come down to. But I think that's very different from saying, oh, we're about to go to the American model, for goodness sake.
Well, maybe, but I mean, the idea that America can dictate a fundamental piece of public policy in Australia is frankly offensive. We talk about things in the China relationship, you know, we get very animated about the slightest thing that's said, but that's a pretty direct attack on a fundamental aspect of Australian society.
I think our reaction to these sort of headlines that come out of the White House is really instructive as a country. We get very, very excited about it.
You think we're getting too excited, Jacob?
I do actually. No, I actually do, because I think there's a reason why Donald Trump does this. And if you think about it, tariffs are a form of beating up on another country. It's an economic version, if you like, of sending a ship around our continent. You know, it has the effect of triggering everybody into, oh, they're coming after our, you know, industry X, Y, and Z. That suits Donald Trump. That is how he plays this game, and it forces us to then have to give up something to make it go away.
Yes.
We should recognise what this is, what it is. Yeah.
Well, it's literally economic coercion, right? Like that's what.
Well, it is, but also, and I agree with that. You know, and that's why he got the nickname, you know, Taco Trump of, you know, Trump always chickens out.
He hates that.
But he hates that. But you know, at the moment, the impact, the economic self-harm aspect of tariffs in the US hasn't really kind of played out as people were thinking would be immediate. I mean, I think it will have obviously a very bad effect long term, but so I think he's kind of getting away with it at the moment politically, and he will kind of continue this. So I'd be far more worried in terms of what's going to happen with the China relationship and the trade on China, the trade in the rest of the world, and that's more imminent.
Yeah, that is. Look, the other sort of story adjacent that became quite a big issue on Friday was a meeting between our ambassador and Donald Trump, and whether we knew about the meeting or not, the opposition suggesting basically that, you know, we'd deliberately been hoodwinked in some way. Here's the Prime Minister dealing with that.
I'd spoken publicly about this at the time.
What was the contents of the meeting?
Well, they had a brief discussion. It's out there. What we don't do is take meetings with world leaders. What we do is engage constructively.
Was it a secret meeting, though, as alleged by the coalition?
Well, I just said that I talked about it at the time.
He did talk about it at the time, Jake. It was just a passing reference, but he kind of did.
It wasn't quite as explicit as we
No, he didn't say, I want to announce that there was this golf course and our ambassador. Like, he didn't, but he did mention it.
He did. I mean, a lot of water's gone under the bridge since then as well. That'd be the point I'd make, number one, since this January meeting. Maybe, we don't know what happened in that meeting. We don't know whether it was a positive one or a negative one. The first meeting that Malcolm Turnbull had with Donald Trump the first time round was a complete disaster. And Canberra was stunned that day that they went silent for 3 days until it leaked in the Washington Post, the transcript.
I don't know you'd call it a complete disaster. I thought it was a triumph. I thought the
fact that... from the point of view that Australia didn't know how to react because it had been such a tense conversation between two leaders, it was out of the norm of that type of well-managed discussion.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull would say he didn't suck up, right?
He held his own, and he held his own.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, you've got a choice really in diplomatic circles, don't you? Do you kind of hide, or do you front up and go head to head? And I think they're still working out where they go.
I think that's right, and I think also it's a case of be careful what you wish for. I mean, obviously it is a good idea to have a meeting between the Prime Minister and President Trump, but there is no doubt that he will make demands or requests that Australia doesn't want to meet, and I don't think we've actually figured out how to handle that either.
I don't know that there is a way to handle it. Just quickly on it though, I mean, journalists are now making a big deal about this story when, as the PM says, he's actually mentioned it before. I mean,
was the failure that we didn't find out more at the time?
Well, when you think about some of the commentary, when, you know, I saw some very overheated commentary about Australia was going to have to withdraw Kevin Rudd from the embassy because, from the US because, you know, of past comments, the relationship was toxic and everything else. I would have thought then that a meeting between Rudd and Trump would have actually occasioned some sort of coverage. But it didn't, and that's really journalists' fault, not the PM's.
All right, always safe to blame journalists. Let's just get on that bus for a moment. Look, I want to change the conversation to where I actually ended with Pat Conroy, and that's the report into anti-Semitism, Gillian Segal handing that over to the government, and a big discussion really on a pretty big report, lots of recommendations, haven't been adopted by the government, although strong comments from the Prime Minister. Here's Gillian Segal talking about it.
It's a holistic plan, and it's a plan that, coming from the envoy, it's my plan, and it's saying if we do this and we look how these laws are going, or we look how immigration is working, it might be absolutely fine, okay? If it needs tweaking, then let's tweak it. Let us put everything under the microscope.
So there was pressure from the coalition saying, why aren't they adopting it? But actually Gillian Segal gave a bit of leeway to the government.
Well, I think there will be a bit of leeway. I mean, I think in many ways this is a response to the fact that the government, state governments, police forces all completely underreacted, were slow to react and continued not to do so for far too long. So in a sense, this is a response to that. And you understand why, but I think it's actually the idea, for example, of taking funding away from institutions or universities that everybody's going to get very excited about. I don't think it'll ever get to that point. But what I do think yes, but what I do think will happen is that universities will have to be, and some of the vice-chancellors will have to be, and councils will have to be more accountable for the fact that they failed to actually control what was going on their campuses, or to be reasonable and not have their own students intimidated for far too long. So I think, and for example, and then of course we had what happened in Melbourne last week, and you had, you know, these people completely in restaurant, completely intimidated, quite apart from what happened in the synagogue, and the idea that this is kind of acceptable and shouldn't be really cut down. I think most people disagree with that.
I think the big debating point, it seems to me, and disagreement, is in relation to definitions as well. And the critique which I put to the Minister is that anti-Semitism would be seen as saying that you don't think Israel should exist, that that's an anti-Semitic statement. Now, many people think that Israel should be one state of equal citizens between Palestinians and Jewish citizens. That is a view, and whether that becomes, you know, it's deemed anti-Semitic.
Well, that is not anti-Semitic. It may be unworkable, but it's not anti-Semitic. It is, in fact, the reason it's opposed in Israel is because it would result in Jewish Israelis not being in the majority and therefore losing control of. Well, it actually
means getting rid of the State of Israel. I mean, I think that is a fairly clear point.
It is a debate.
Well, of course it's a debate, but I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't say that that is anti-Semitic. I think it is.
Well,
but people do contest that, Jennifer. This is
well, of course.
Well, if it's a democracy, why does this state have a leave pass to be based on religion? And yet claim itself to be a democracy.
Well,
if you have an entire population with access to the vote and full citizenship rights and everything else within the borders of that country, then that is what we call a democracy in every other part of the world.
Well, I think if you're suddenly going to start rewriting borders about what, you know, the state of Israel,
there's been a fair bit of
very different.
I think it goes, though, Jacob, to the issue of freedom of speech as well, and particularly arts organisations would lose funding as well under
Public
this.
broadcasters, suggestion that you dock money out of universities. Those things are all very problematic. Just from a practical point of view, as you said, I'd be incredibly surprised if the government adopted those sort of measures. But that does go to the concerns inside the Jewish community who feel that there's too much focus on what Israel is doing. The irony, of course, is colleagues of ours do not have access to the territories.
What's going on in Gaza?
Very, very limited, very mediated, very controlled. And so you've got that tension there from the other side as well.
There is no doubt that there is high rates of anti-Semitism and that the government, I think the Prime Minister's response was incredibly strong in sort of leaning into it and saying he wants to take it seriously. It'll be interesting to see.
But I think also, you know, the fact that you've got many people, we've had these big demonstrations in Israel. There's lots of people in Israel as well who disagree with the Netanyahu government. It's perfectly valid to do that. That is quite different to what's been happening in Australia.
I think there is a lot of diversity of view. I mean, just read Haaretz. I mean, you know, Israel is obviously a democracy where these things are discussed. Look, I want to move to just finally the Reserve Bank of Australia met. They didn't cut rates. Everyone lost their minds. And the Treasurer didn't seem overwhelmingly pleased with the decision. Here's the Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock, explaining.
What the decision today was about timing rather than direction. What we're looking for is confirmation that we are basically on our forecast path, and that gives us confidence that we are on a path towards easing further.
It's all about timing, Jacob.
Is it though? I mean, they need confidence that they're on the right path. What if new evidence comes out that erodes that confidence?
Well, I think that's what they're asking for. Yeah. They're asking for time for that.
They're also saying that this is it's a bit of a mixed message.
It's just why the markets and the RBA watchers have had a great deal of trouble with this one this week. But we'll see. Well, we know the data is bitsy on those monthly inflation reports, and they're saying on the end of this month you get the quarterly one. And they're going to wait and see until those numbers come
historical data, though, right? It's 3-month historical data.
Yes, but I think it was reasonable to say, listen, we're going to wait. And one of the reasons, of course, that the market was so blindsided is because of what the government calls reform. I'm not actually convinced it's been a good reform at all, is the idea of making the Reserve Bank board more unpredictable about what it's going to do. And in the past, you might have had, you know, some quiet hints. Well, look, actually, we're still a bit concerned about this. But now we've got, you know, and then we have, of course, now...
we know how they vote.
We know how they vote, which, again, I think is a really bad idea.
Not the names, the numbers.
No, the numbers. But that's like saying, oh, what was the cabinet decision? Oh, you know, we'll give the breakdown. There's a reason you have solidarity. And so this idea that, you know, everybody's going, oh, who voted what? I think that's actually a very bad idea in terms of stability and trust in the Reserve Bank.
Mark, you disagree?
Look, I think it's an odd thing for journalists to not want greater transparency, and I think we're halfway there. I think to know which way people voted would be the next step, and that is the norm in some other central banks.
The argument is they'd be lobbied. And we don't want that situation.
And individuals
it works in central banks in other parts of the world, quite a number of them. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue against transparency. I like the idea of the fact of the board having proper, robust debates. I note that it was a 6-3 decision. I note that there are 3 Reserve Bank people who are on there. So really, it's a 50-50 decision between the other 6. That's what it amounts to. So it's a pretty close-run thing. I think, frankly, the decision doesn't really speak of a great deal of confidence within the bank for its own previous position, which was that it seemed to have inflation lift.
I think you're on the money there, Mark. I mean, I think you've got the signal was given at the beginning of the year, first of many, many cuts to come. What we're now discovering is the world is much more complicated than that forecast from even a couple of months ago. Maybe geopolitical issues blow that picture up.
Well, they said that in their statement, didn't they? The geopolitical situation is clearly part of it. Let's move now to Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer-at-large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with the editor of the Daily Oz, Billi FitzSimons, and a very warm welcome to Talking Pictures.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Billi, the world economy might be increasingly unstable, but the President of the United States thinks it's going terrifically.
See what you did there.
Billi, lovely Matt Golding cartoon here. Please cough up.
Please cough up. Clever.
I immediately sort of thought, say, ah! Lovely Peter Bromman, Billi. He's picked up on the old Abbott line suppositories of all wisdom, hasn't he? I would sure like to tell Trump what he can do with his pharma tariff.
And then Jim Chalmers, not Tony Abbott, says, not so fast, he's also put 200% on suppositories.
Yeah, insert 2 and call me in the morning.
Yeah.
Lovely Megan Herbert cartoon. We finally received an invitation for a rescheduled meeting with President Trump. The good news, it's on the White House lawn, and it's referring to the UFC fight that they're scheduling next year at the White House. It's probably appropriate, isn't it? Because some of those meetings in the Oval Office have been like a cage fight.
A literal cage fight, they have.
I think he could lean into that, you know, the mauler from Marrickville in the cage fight, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure. I think he would do well.
Yeah,
Wait, I have one more thing on this. White House. It's 2 words.
It's 2 words, okay.
Not one.
I just loved this.
Yes.
Because of the absurdity of the whole thing. It's a lovely Matt Golding cartoon. A representative from Heard Island to see you.
Finally, someone showing some respect by turning up wearing a suit.
And it's a penguin.
It's a penguin. It's a commentary on how these tariffs have affected literally all jurisdictions, even the ones that don't have populations.
Even the penguins on Heard Island. Billy, the RBA decided that a rate cut wasn't in the national interest.
Yeah, I think it was something like 90% of economists had predicted that there would be a rate cut, but there wasn't in the end.
Lovely David Rowe here, Billy. It's Jim as Julius Caesar.
I like here how they have the percentages as kind of daggers to the back.
Yeah, it's a 2 RBA.
What was interesting this week was that it was the first time that they had actually released the split.
The actual split.
And I think it's about the transparency of it.
Yeah, fascinating. Lovely Warren Brown here suggesting that the people holding on is poor old householders here holding on by their fingernails. We're holding.
Who's holding?
Yeah.
Well, mortgage holders. And I think it shows Michelle Bullock, the RBA governor, being very stoic about the decision. And the eyes closed, I think is interesting. You know, it's kind of shutting out the noise and kind of just having to be quite clinical about it. And then the mortgage holders in the extreme distress.
It'd be a tough job.
Not easy.
Billy, the coroner in the Northern Territory this week handed down its findings in the Kumajaya Walker inquest, and it delivered some pretty hard truths. Fiona Katauskas has picked up on this. Truth-telling is all very well, but truth-denying is an essential part of our nation's history. It's she makes a good point, doesn't she?
This does come after Victoria handed down the first official truth-telling inquiry in Australia, but this just shows how far we have to go with that.
It's a long journey. Jess Harwood, I think, has illustrated this beautifully. We've got all the press here outside the Latrobe Valley Court, one woman guilty of murder via mushrooms, and there's all this public interest, and then the Northern Territory coroner.
Yeah, saying the entire Northern Territory police force bears the hallmarks of institutional racism, and that led to the death of Kumajaya Walker. I think this couldn't paint a more accurate picture. They don't even have one journalist here, and obviously that's hyperbolic, but I think it really does paint an accurate picture of the level or the disparity in the level of media attention that was on one and not the other.
Yeah, it's a hard-hitting cartoon, that one. Donald Trump's presidency may not be peaceful, but he's still hoping to nab the Nobel Prize.
He really does.
Do you think it's just because Obama got it back a few years
Probably.
back? He's always comparing himself to...
Yes.
Matt Bissett-Johnson has drawn this. It's I think these must be Bunkum bluster bombs. It's got Peace Prize written all over it. It's sort of fighting for peace, Billy. It's a weird concept.
Bombs and peace aren't usually two things that you'd put together.
Which Matt Golding has picked up on here. If truth is the first casualty of war, the second must be credulity.
Yeah, Netanyahu nominates Trump for Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Look, I think this says it all.
Billy, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
Thank you so much for having me. Back to you, Patricia.
Thanks, Billy. Time for final observations, Mark.
Yeah, look, just back to our conversation about Israel and one state versus two state and so forth. I mean, I'm firmly of the view that it ought to be a two-state solution. I wasn't advocating for a one state, so I just want to be clear about that. But it's really about definitions of what constitutes anti-Semitism in this very overheated debate.
The Tasmanian elections on Saturday. Haven't had a lot of attention to that outside of Tasmania, but that's why there's been a lot of talk about a bailout of one of the smelters in Tasmania. It's a good old-fashioned subsidy bailout, but it's tarted up with the talk of critical minerals and the need for processing.
Tarted up, I like that, Jennifer.
There's a reform summit coming up next month. People yearn to the sort of big bang things that happened in the past, GST, dismantling tariff walls. Future reforms might look very, very different. I'm told it's going to be worth watching Ken Henry at the National Press Club this week for his ideas on this front.
Well, he's had a few in the past, hasn't he, guys?
Not all of them adopted.
No, he's been waiting.
He's seen successful ones and unsuccessful ones.
He certainly has. Look, it's my last time filling in. David Spears will be back ahead of the parliamentary sitting week, so thank you. You've been an excellent panel. And finally, there are many people who have tried and failed to understand the magic formula used by Donald Trump to come up with his amazing tariffs. The maths has not been mathing. But this week, after announcing a 50% tariff on Brazil, Mr Trump was kind enough to clear it up for those confused by the logic. We'll leave you with that. Bye for now.
The formula was a formula based on common sense, based on deficits, based on how we've been treated over the years, and based on raw numbers.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.